Overall, this presentation will cover the history of ability tracking, the current standing of ability tracking, a SWOT analysis, potential solutions to ability tracking, and a conclusion. Ability tracking aims to group students who are at the same level in different subjects together. However, this method is failing. Ability tracking overall does not increase achievement in schools, but instead it promotes inequality, since students who are classified as advanced are moved to more rigorous classes, whereas students who are more basic, so to speak, grade level, are held back and not given the same academic chances to succeed. For example, in 8th grade, a student who is classified as advanced may be taking a high school class like algebra or geometry, whereas a student their same age who struggles with math more may be given problems or coursework well below their grade level, if not at their own grade level. And this is important because even if students as young as elementary and middle school, if ability tracking is used then, they oftentimes don't have a chance to get ahead and take honors classes when they're in high school. Despite the issues with ability tracking, there are ways to overcome these hurdles. First, due to the scientific studies and research that has been performed, and there's been no effect on how students perform because of ability tracking, tracking can be used less often or eradicated completely. An additional step is due to the statistically seen high rate of tracking system failure across the United States. Lawmakers and politicians need to become more involved and find different methods of how to track students' progress, but not ability tracking, not putting them in different groups, in different classes because of how they perform on tests. And this needs to be implemented nationwide in order to have the most drastic effect, since if it wasn't nationally regulated, then Ohio could have different laws than New Mexico. And we want this on a national scale so every student across America does not suffer from the flaws of ability tracking.
So now we're going to cover important vocabulary related to tracking. So first, starting off with tracking. Tracking is separating pupils by academic ability into groups for all subjects or certain classes and curriculum within a school. Streaming and phasing are alternative terms used for tracking. And then when we talk about tracking, there's two different types of tracking, within class grouping and then between class grouping. So within class grouping, a teacher usually puts students of similar ability into small groups, usually for reading or math instruction. And then between class grouping, schools would separate students into different classes, courses, or course sequences based on their academic achievement. So usually this is where you'll see honors, regular, or AP. So now we're going to cover the history of tracking. Tracking emerged around the turn of the 20th century as a way to prepare students for their appropriate place in the workforce. A little bit of context about where America stood at the turn of the 20th century. America was changing drastically at this time. Jobs had started to become more industrial based. So these jobs would demand a little bit more than an 8th grade education. Because students wanted to obtain these jobs, they would stay in high school. But many students were struggling to adapt to the rigorous academics that high school brought. So progressive educators turned to curriculum tracks for students. Students would essentially take classes that they needed to develop the skills depending on what career they were expected to pursue someday. So it was really career-based. It wasn't developing a holistic student. They would stay on the track that they needed to learn what they needed to learn in order to pursue their career. In addition to career-centered, in the early years, tracking was also used as a response to the growing number of immigrant children coming into the public school system. The goal was to essentially provide these children with an education that was centered to their limited understanding of the English language and their limited preparation as compared to native students. However, when tracking was used in this manner in terms of immigrant children, what ended up happening was an internal segregation within the American public school system. So you would have classes full of immigrant children and then classes full of native children. So now we're going to cover the current status of tracking today. In high school, the concept of tracking is used to provide different levels of difficulty for certain courses. So this would be dividing students into your basic class, your honors classes, and then college preparation classes or AP classes. In elementary and middle schools, tracking is a little less formal and a little less permanent. In elementary and middle schools is usually where you see the concept of within class tracking, which is teacher based. So ability groups are formed within individual classrooms that never really last longer than a year. Again, they're assigned by the teacher, not by the school system. So according to a particular subject or individual lesson, you could see a student in various tracks. So for example, if a student is excelling in mathematics, then he might be in the bluebirds. And then if he's not excelling in fractions, he would be in the red robins. So that's usually where you see tracking in elementary, more particular elementary school than middle school. However, tracking is a linear system. So usually if students are not in advanced groups or advanced classes in middle school, they will most likely not be able to take advanced courses, honors or AP courses before graduating high school. So it is a linear system. So although tracking is less formal in elementary and middle school, it definitely has an impact on the path you take in high school. Continuing on with the current status of tracking, some findings from a 2013 Brown Center report on American education found that from 1998 to 2009, reading ability grouping had increased from 28% to 71%. Similarly, from 1996 to 2011, ability grouping used in mathematics had increased from 40% to 61%. So we are seeing a rise in the use of tracking in our public school system. A case study related to ability tracking is the American Civil Liberties Union and the Civil Rights Project at UCLA versus South Orange Maplewood School District. So pretty much in 2014, the Department of Education found that the district's tracking practices resulted in a gross underrepresentation of African American students in higher level learning programs. So at the elementary level, while white students made up only 54% of fifth grade students, they represented 82% of the students enrolled in fifth grade math enrichment program. So there was a vast disparity there. And then at the secondary level, while Black students made up 51.5% of high school and 42.9% of middle school populations, they were only 18.7% were enrolled in AP learning opportunities and 11.7% in the middle school advanced math courses. So the tracking was pretty much assigning minority students unjustifiably and disproportionately to lower tracks, almost pretty much excluding them from these accelerated tracks, which of course gives them inferior opportunities to learn. And then trifold is to blame in part for their lower achievement. Continuing on with our case study, The complainant really wanted the district to replace tracking with a standard curriculum for students at all levels and then just provide supplementary instruction for students who need it. The case is actually still ongoing. However, the district leaders of the Maplewood School District have announced a $127 million plan to renovate buildings and reconfigure schools so it reflects the district's demographics. So this is the district just trying to get a head start on fixing this problem before this case has been completely settled.
So now we're going to be looking at the SWOT analysis, which examines the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of ability tracking. So firstly, we'll look at the strengths. So in a 2013 article on the Washington Post by education writer Valerie Strauss, it says that tracking allows teachers to be more directly addressing the needs of their students in the classroom because they're perceived to be on similar academic levels and they're similarly prepared for the material they're learning. Secondly, in a 2016 article in The Atlantic by Jill Barchet, a staff editor at the Hetchinger Report, she cites a 2016 study that found that states that had a higher level of ability tracking in 8th grade math had a higher correlation with students scoring higher on advanced placement exams in the future of their education careers. And lastly, a study by the National Economic Research Center found that ability tracking that placed minority students such as Black and Hispanic children in the quote-unquote gifted classes was very beneficial to these students because in the gifted classrooms, teachers expected excellency from all students regardless of race. Furthermore, students in these gifted classrooms pushed each other to achieve higher grades and better scores, which was to the benefit of everyone in the class. So now we're going to be talking about some weaknesses of ability tracking. So in another 2013 article in the Washington Post by the same writer, Valerie Strauss, she shared some opinions from Joan Yatbin, and Yatbin said that even within distinct ability classrooms, there is still a variety of learning within students and people go at different paces and have their own different techniques. So teachers aren't necessarily catering to a specific group, even though the classes might have similarly abled students. Next, what students are taught has an effect on the achievement gap. So rich and poor kids aren't being taught the same things in the schools they go to. So this means that they aren't getting equal access and opportunity to get into higher classes and better classes in the future. So having this division actually worsens the achievement gap. And then lastly, the ability tracking system creates a quote-unquote cycle of restricted opportunity because some people, when they start off school, they're placed in a lower level group or track, and essentially they're subject and labeled to this track, and they end up being stuck in that level, which hinders their future education progress as a student. When it comes to ability tracking, there are some opportunities presented as well. So first, students learn better and feel more comfortable when they are placed on tracks because the students in the classroom are all on similar ability levels, and this gives them the opportunity to challenge each other academically and push each other to perform better. Next, teachers generally have an easier time when there's ability tracking because the students in their classrooms, again, are all based on a similar academic performance or level, so it allows them to spend more time preparing for new and more engaging lessons instead of trying to make sure the whole class keeps up with each other. And lastly, for parents of gifted students, quote-unquote gifted students, they don't have to worry about their child's progress in learning being slowed down by other students if it were like in a mixed classroom. And on the other hand, parents of students placed in lower tracks, they don't have to worry about their child falling behind in their classes, like something that would happen in a mixed classroom. However, there are also threats to ability tracking. Firstly, when students are labeled from a young age, this condemns them to a certain title, which is a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. Secondly, the instruction and teaching in higher ability classes is usually better than that of the lower ability classes, meaning that they get better teachers, more attention per student, more resources in these classrooms, while students in the lower ability classes, who need all these things just as much or maybe even more, won't get these opportunities. So it creates a division. And lastly, tracking creates segregation within schools along socioeconomic and racial lines, and it places a stigma on lower tracks. And you can see this when kids are getting pulled out of classrooms, there's a stigma around that, or if they're being taught in completely different classrooms, there's also a stigma there. So here are some solutions we came across during our research. First one is called cooperative learning, which means that students would be in the same classroom, but instead of being divided into different tracks, they would just be divided within that classroom into smaller groups, and these groups would have very diverse mixed ability students that would work together on all assignments and projects and such. But one limitation of the solution is that we'd expect the kids who would have been in the higher track to dominate these smaller groups, which wouldn't allow the kids who would have been on the lower track to get their voices heard. Secondly, another solution would be towards the end of middle school, 7th or 8th grade possibly. At that time, parents would be allowed to decide on what level classes the child should take for the coming years, and the school can approve this decision or not. So this decision would be made with the parents, teachers, and the student to best find the correct level class. One limitation of this solution is that parents might want to push their children to higher levels even if the child's not prepared for that, or on the other hand, students maybe want to go on a lower level to have it easier in a subject. Lastly, another solution is completely detracking, which means that schools shouldn't implement tracking systems at all. And this is different from our first solution of cooperative learning, because completely detracking means there's no separation, while cooperative learning, we still would divide students into smaller groups.
Hopefully this presentation has educated you about ability tracking and its overall consequences on the American education system. And hopefully you have learned that ability tracking is harmful since it increases the disparities between students of not only different academic abilities, but also of different races, because students who are minority are often left behind and never have a chance to catch up. And ability tracking overall, summarized, is when students are given work based on how they perform on tests or overall how well of a student they are. So students will be placed in different classes based on how quote unquote smart they are. So this can result in students being given work grades above their current grade level or even grades below. So it's important to stop ability tracking so all students are given a chance at a good education. Hopefully this presentation